Hi there, everyone. My name is Becky Robinson, and I'm so thrilled to welcome you today to our webinar, Catalyzing Leadership Energy with Matt Paese. Matt, how are you doing today?
Hi, everybody. I'm great.
So those of you who called in early might have known that we were having a lot of fun over here while we were getting ready for this event. And I know that this is going to be an hour that's chock full of amazing learning that's going to help you move forward in your organization. Before we get started, I have a few notes for you. The question I always hear is, will we be sharing the slides? Yes, Matt has a tremendous slide deck that is full of amazing content. No need to take notes. We will send them to you as a PDF after this event. Additionally, we are also recording this event, and we will share that recording with you as well after the event. So I want to help you get to know our technology, and if you have a quick second, if you could open up the question panel and let us know where you're calling in from today. If you're at work, tell us where you work, the organization, and if you happen to be watching in a group, give us a shout out about that as well. Looks like we have a caller from Houston, Texas. Welcome. Ottawa, Ontario. Houston, Seattle. Discovery Benefits in South Dakota. New Hampshire, Chile, Wisconsin, Pittsburgh, Toronto, California, Florida, Colorado. These are going so fast. Lima, Ohio. Hello, Lima. Alpharetta, Georgia, New York City, Kansas, Athens, Georgia. I'm curious if there's anyone on this call besides Matt who's from St. Louis, Missouri. So hello and welcome to all of you. Thank you so much for joining us. One more thing, we are going to live tweet during this event. We want to invite you to participate in that with us, and we are using the hashtag #LeadersReadyNow. For those of you who are not aware, we are this week celebrating the launch of Matt's new book, Leadership Ready Now. And if you stay on until the very end of the call, you might have a chance to win a free copy of the book. So thanks again for being with us. And Matt, I'm happy to let everyone know a little bit about you. As I mentioned, you are in St. Louis, Missouri, and Matt is the Vice President of Succession and C-Suite Services for Development Dimensions International, also known as DDI. And I'll tell you a bit more about DDI in a second. And you know, I've had a chance to get to know Matt in this whole book launch process, and what I know about Matt is he's really passionate about coffee and learning to be a barista. He loves his amazing and successful wife, Ellen, his 2 kids. And he also is very passionate about the work of equipping people to be more effective as leaders. DDI as a company has been training leaders and developing leaders for as long as Matt has been alive, almost 5 decades. And for those of you who are not aware of what DDI does in the world, DDI is a leading global human resources consultancy, and they specialize in leadership assessment and development. And DDI as an organization transforms the way companies hire, promote, and develop leaders across the entire pipeline. And this new book, Leaders Ready Now, is an important part of that, isn't it, Matt?
Yeah, it sure is. Yeah, thank you, Becky. Very nice.
Oh,
absolutely. Very nice. And in another venue, we should do a coffee venue someplace so that I can make coffee for everyone. Right. Exactly.
That would be amazing. I happen to be drinking Tim Hortons coffee, so based on what you've told me, you might be able to brew a cup that rivals that.
I don't know. Maybe. Anyway, that's a totally different webinar. We'll do that another day.
Well, I'll be back with you for some Q&A at the end, Matt, and we look forward to learning from you today.
Okay, so we're all set to go. All right, everybody, thanks for joining. This is a really thrilling moment for us. We're on to some ideas that, frankly, come from people a lot like yourselves, people who are professionals in this industry, people who've been at this for a long time, and we've had the opportunity to work with many of you, and we have been distilling a lot of the lessons that we've gathered and trying to put together some ways of getting past some of the hurdles we're in front of. So my job today is, in very short order, to give you a flyby of what is inside some of these ideas so that you can begin to work with them yourselves and hopefully distill them into something that will mean something new and perhaps exciting and energizing for your organization, for you, for your leaders. So I'm going to hold off at the preamble or hold with any more of that and get into diving in. I think everyone knows that there are ways to ask questions. Becky is my sidekick throughout this whole thing. You can't see her now, but she's still here. She's paying attention to you and tracking with all your questions. So if you have them, let us know. we're saving time at the end to be sure that we process them. But if you're confused or lost or have a question or issue about something, we'll obviously take those as they go. So I'm going to get plugging along here. Here's some things we're hearing. Hey, listen, we never have to go outside for leaders. We have a big surplus. I was totally prepared when I got my job. This leadership thing's easy, and we have a clear picture of who our future leaders are, except not really. That's sort of not what we're hearing. Here's more of what we're actually hearing from people like yourselves. People are questioning whether their leaders can drive the strategies they have. Where is our future executive team going to come from? How do I get people ready and engaged, and things like where are our next key leaders like CEOs, but not only CEOs, coming from? So this is a good chance for me to ask you a question. So I would like to launch a little poll here to have you tell us what your leaders are saying. So if this is working right, you should be seeing a poll right now. I think I don't see it, but Becky, is that poll up right now?
Yes, it is.
Excellent. Oh yeah, I see. Some numbers are coming in. So go ahead and let us know if you feel like you have a surplus of leadership, or all the way down at the bottom, whether you feel like you're short of leadership.
This is a really, really interesting question, Matt. And I'm betting that you get similar answers from folks when you do this poll. Is that true?
You know, I have some predictions about what we're going to get. I don't expect to see a lot of people up picking that first option. Every now and then we do, and whoever picks that option, everybody else wants to know who they are and what they're doing differently. But we do tend to see it skew a little bit more toward the bottom of the items, which looks like we got about 3/4 of you in. So if you haven't voted yet, we'll just take another few seconds here, and then I'm going to close it and show you what your results look like.
Very cool.
Okay, 3 seconds, 2, 1, here we go. Closing and showing you what the results look like. So Becky, can you see those results?
I absolutely can. So only about
Good.
3% of you said that you have a surplus of leadership capability. By far, 38% of you said we don't have enough capability now. 17% say you have enough. 18% are slightly concerned, and 24%, a quarter of the people on this call, say that they are dangerously short of leadership capability in their organizations.
Yeah, so you're tracking with some of the broader data that we have that I'll show you in just a second. But I think it's just a good way for all of us to understand where we sit proportionately with the way most organizations are encountering their own challenges. And I think it's fair to say that the majority of organizations are looking to close some sort of a gap, to create more leadership capability where they don't have enough now. So let me try a few basic ideas here. So this is a highly complicated slide. I hope you can hang with me here. That's a joke. They get dry with me, sorry. Anyway, you are here, and that dotted line is time. It is moving, and the future is coming. Leadership demands are certainly not getting any easier. I haven't yet had anyone challenge me on the trajectory of leadership demands. The world is getting more difficult. Leaders are finding it more and more challenging to be successful all the time. But here's the interesting thing, leadership readiness, and this is not an opinion, there's data that is suggesting that over time, leadership readiness is not moving in the same direction. As a matter of fact, it's moving in the opposite direction as leadership demands. So about 4 or 5 years ago, we did a survey, a global survey. It's about 12 or 13,000 people globally, including mostly line leaders, some HR people. About 18% of them said that they had enough leadership for the future, meaning, of course, that 82% of them say they don't. So we redid that study in 2014 and 15, and the numbers go down. And it's not just DDI that's finding that. That data is all over the place. The readiness trajectory is moving in the opposite direction of the difficulty curve. So right now, about 15% of companies are saying that they've got enough bench strength. 46% of the time is how often organizations say that they can look to the bench and find someone who's ready to fill an open position, a key leadership position, an executive job. And a lot of organizations are trying to fix the problem. about 2/3 have HIPO programs, but of those, almost 3/4 of them say that they're not very effective. So something's not working right, and it suggests that there's this general trend, and you can look at more data that I'm not going to show you slides on right now. We're happy to share it if you're interested. But over the last decade, investments have been increasing while the rate of readiness has been decreasing. And that alarms us a little bit. And it alarms us as a firm. It should alarm us as individual organizations and leaders. And I think it should alarm us as a discipline of talent management. We should be concerned. So what we want to try and do, of course, is close this gap and make it look a little bit more like that. That's the idea here. The question is how, because the world is changing, and the practices and processes that we've been using for many years and decades leading up to now aren't working quite as well as they once did. We've had experience with over 1,000 organizations at DDI trying to accelerate the growth of leaders and working explicitly on accelerated growth programs, some of which are HIPO programs, some of which are broader leadership development initiatives. But at their core, these 1,000+ organizations are organizations that said, we explicitly are trying to speed up the rate at which we grow leaders. And so we've looked at that and used the lessons that we've been gathering from all of these organizations and saying, okay, who is it that's succeeding in growing leadership, and who is it that's still struggling? It's caused us to do some real rethinking of what we think we know about the main things we need to do to make leadership grow faster. So let's start with the most basic objective. We want to start sooner to get more leaders ready faster. And when I say start sooner, that means dip down into lower levels of leadership and start the development of leaders earlier in their careers so that we can get more trajectory, more growth, and better leadership faster. So this is where I'm going to turn it back to you again and ask you a question. So this is a memory test. Think back to the time in your career when you were learning more rapidly than any other time, okay? And when you think back to that moment, I'm going to ask what emotion is most closely associated with that time in your career. And I'm going to pull up another question here and let you answer that. So Becky, you should be seeing 5 alternatives right now.
I am. And while we're looking at those and allowing people to answer, Matt, I did have someone who asked if you could explain what a HIPO program is.
Yes, I'm so glad. A HIPO program, the shorthand for a high potential program. They're people who an organization identifies as individuals or leaders who have the potential to grow. They're not there yet. They may not be ready for a promotion or a bigger job, but they've been identified as people who have potential. And so they get a shorthand as a HIPO, or a program is called a HIPO program. They come by lots of other names as well, but that's what that is. I'm so glad you asked. Thank you for that.
My pleasure. So it looks like we have about 72% of people who have voted, and we can probably close that up in a second, Matt. What do you think?
Sure. Yeah, let's do it, because we're getting a pretty strong indication of what the results look like here. And sure
Would you
enough,
like me to share those results?
Yes, please do.
All right, so it looks like 55% of you say that you've had all of the above emotions and more: excitement, fear, exhilaration, and anxiety. So 30% honed in on excitement alone, and 11% on exhilaration, and 4% on anxiety.
Yeah. So guess what? You see this slide populating here. This isn't the first time we've asked this question, right? And so we get the same kinds of responses each time we ask it. When you're learning quickly, there's a simple equation here. When you're learning quickly, there's energy. Sometimes it feels good. Sometimes it feels risky. Sometimes you're, as one person put it, terrified. But in no matter what the situation is, there's energy associated with that. Here's the problem. That's not always the way people describe the programs we design for them. So if we build a learning initiative or we have an accelerated growth program, a lot of times people will tell us that it's business relevant. They'll tell us that this made sense to me, or I can use this. That's good. That's very good. And we shouldn't ignore the value that we're generating. However, think back, though, about the readiness curve. We're looking at the leadership readiness curve going up, or the demands going up, and leadership readiness not tracking with it. And so we're missing something when it comes to actually preparing people to be ready to do new things that they couldn't do before. And part of what we've begun to learn from the so many organizations that we've worked with is that there's something about this energy concept that we better pay closer attention to. So that was the basic premise of why and what we sought when we went to craft a new book about accelerating growth. And because we had a lot of questions about how do we grow leaders faster. And one thing that didn't make sense to us is trying to cram more learning into the crazy busy lives that people are already leading. They're exhausted, they're tired, they're trying to work their way through a chaotic world. We're not going to increase the rate at which our readiness uh, flows inside our organizations by simply trying to force more learning through the same already narrow, full pipe that we're using. So we created this list of things we wanted to write about. What about not just an acceleration pool, but the rest of the organization? How do you make it a business priority? We created this big list. I'm not going to go through it all. And I want to tell you, as soon as we created this list of things we wanted to write about, this is how we felt. Sometimes I feel like when we as talent management professionals, and I'm including you and we at DDI, work with our clients, whether they're internal or other organizations, I think sometimes because of the complexity of what we're trying to deal with, we often leave our business partners feeling as though they're almost exhausted before we begin. And so we wanted to sort of change this equation and say, what are the buttons we can press to not exhaust our organization, but what can we do to create energy so that when people describe the processes we build, they describe them like they describe their fast learning moments. That was energizing. That scared me a little bit. That was exciting. I really felt the tension of a growth moment. So these 6 circles you see are what we call acceleration imperatives. Don't think of them like process models or steps in an implementation plan. These are places you can go to create energy in any acceleration system. And I want to take a few minutes and talk about them because they represent the places where organizations have chosen, not all of them, by the way, but in 1 or 2, sometimes 3 of these is where organizations have gotten real energy and gotten traction around changing their equation with respect to readiness. So I want to talk about what some organizations say when they talk about what they're doing in each of these imperatives. And I'll do this quickly, just to talk about what each of these are. Commit, aim, identify, assess, grow, sustain. Commit is about making acceleration a business priority. And some organizations say that they have management support. With aim, that's about knowing what you're looking for. That's some organizations will say they have a good competency model in place. Identify. It's very difficult to get a talent review in place, and sometimes it's like moving a mountain just to get people to attend and participate. And so some organizations, when they're doing a good job, they feel as though they've got a talent review in place and their executives are engaged. With assess, this is using objective assessment to support decision making, and some organizations will say that they use assessment for key roles and high-risk decisions. Grow, which is making the right development happen. Some organizations will say that they have learning courses available. And in terms of sustain, some will say that they hold their leaders accountable for making sure that growth happens. All of these statements are good. And what I'll tell you is that we know organizations that have most or all of these in place who are still falling behind in terms of their overall readiness. And so the question is, what are some of the different things that organizations are saying when they're really achieving bigger, more significant results? So let me contrast some of what you've just seen with what's here. So some organizations will say, our senior management team has actually become competitive about making acceleration happen. That's not competitive trying to steal talent from one another. That's competitive trying to share talent with one another, which is a very, very different dynamic. Some organizations will say that the tools they use, their leadership model is so relevant and precise that their leaders and managers use it like an indispensable tool. Some organizations will refer to their talent management process and talk about shrewdness and accuracy. Our leaders don't just come in to participate in a talent review. They come in to make shrewd decisions about who we're going to invest in and why. That's different. Some organizations, when they talk about assess, will refer to what I call a nearly unhealthy, not totally unhealthy, but a nearly unhealthy addiction to objective talent data. These are the line managers who won't make a move without calling you in talent management or human resources to say, I need some objective data before I make a promotion decision or before I make a hiring decision. With respect to grow, some organizations, when they talk about making learning happen, talk more about what happens after events, and not just that some activities happened, but that people are actually applying and practicing and working with new approaches that the business needs. That's a very different incarnation of learning than what is the place in many organizations who will call what they do best practice. So one more, and sustain is a real tricky one. We're going to come back to it, but it has to do with manufacturing positive growth tension. It's manufacturing the kind of energy that each of you were talking about earlier, or thinking about at least when you were thinking about your moments of rapid learning. So this is different. These are great statements. These organizations that can talk about some aspects of their programs as being great achieve very different results than organizations that just achieve good. It has caused us at DDI to really ask big questions about what we believe best practice is, because maybe best practice has begun to age or decay a little bit. So I'm going to put these side by side. I know this is a lot of words, but the implication here is that things that were once regarded as good now may not be good enough. And I want to, before I go any further, ask another question of each of you again. And here's where I'm actually going to ask two questions, but the first one is what you believe your organization's greatest strength is with respect to these imperatives. And before I put this up, I'm going to warn you, there are 6 imperatives here. We're only allowed to put up 5 alternatives. And because almost everyone recognizes sustain as an opportunity for growth, I left it off. So you're going to have a chance to talk about what your organization's biggest strength is, even if it's not great, whatever your biggest strength is, and choose between A through E, which you see here, and go ahead and select the imperative that you think your organization's biggest strength is. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect, doesn't have to be great. Where do you think you're doing well?
All right, and people are already beginning to answer. Thank you.
And this one, I have some expectations about what we're going to get, but fewer, and I'll explain that in just a minute.
Very cool. So Matt, maybe this is not a fair question while people are answering the poll, but DDI as an organization, do you have a sense of what you would select if you were answering this poll?
As our strengths?
Mm-hmm.
I think our strength is probably commit. And I suppose it probably has to do with how we're wired as an organization and what we believe our purpose is. So I don't know if my peers would answer the same way, but I think it's a great question. I would love to get our own senior leadership team. I think though we're not perfect at everything. We're like anyone else working at it, but I think that's one where I guess just by definition of who we are, that's where we've got a good start. We've got coming up on 2/3 of you. If you haven't voted yet, or if you aren't sure and you're on the fence, go ahead and pick one. Maybe you want to pick more than one, but commit to a vote. And in just a couple seconds here, we'll publish the results.
And I would also, if you have comments or want to clarify your selection, feel free to put that in the question panel, and I'd be happy to either answer a question or fill in on your comments if you'd like to add
Perfect.
some.
Great.
Okay, so here we go. This is what we've got. We have 25% of you who identify commit as your organization's strength, 22% with aim, 19% with identify, 16% with assess, and 18% with grow. And Matt, I have a comment here from someone who I won't name, who's asking, what if our organization isn't good at any of these? And then another person who said none and gave me a really sad face.
Well, first of all, let me first say that I'm going to come back to that thought. What if you're not good at any of them? You're not alone. A lot of organizations feel that way, and you're not without hope, and you're not alone. It's very frankly a common scenario, and I'm going to come back to that. So I'm so glad you asked the question. So we've got a pretty even distribution of where organizations see their own strengths and weaknesses. I'm going to invite you to not ask a question. We're not going to have a chance to talk about this, but think about whether you and other members of your talent management team, or perhaps other business leaders or senior management team members, agree with you or even have the same perspective, and what the implications of that are. Because I think knowing where your strengths and weaknesses are is one thing, but it's another thing to have a common view of it. So now I'm going to put up the other side of the coin, which is where you think your biggest and most important weakness is. And again, same choices, but talk about what you think your organization's most significant liability is. And again, same choices. Just take a minute here and pick the one that you think is most damaging in your organization.
And those answers are coming in quickly as well.
They are. They are.
I should probably not turn that question back on you for DDI, unless you feel like you want to be vulnerable.
I mean, what I can tell you is that one thing that is always evolving for us is the ways to help people grow. And I think while we at DDI would like to believe that we're great at it, we are always having to respond to context, which is, I think, one of the big messages that we're going to talk about today. As the world changes around us, the way to help people who are trying to grow quickly do so in a way that doesn't pull them out of their job or pull them away from what they have to focus their attention on, that is a constant evolution and something we always have to be rethinking. And so I would submit that our weakness is probably grow, not because we don't have good tools and processes and we don't have good thinking about it, but because we have to move so fast to always be reinventing. So I'm going to now go ahead and publish the results of what we've got here. And so here we have, interesting, we had the highest number of strengths in commit, and we also have the highest number of weaknesses in commit. But now we have a lot of weaknesses in grow as well. I wonder if some of the things I was just mentioning might be part of what others are thinking. What do you think, Becky?
It's possibly true. And it shows that we have people from a variety of contexts who likely are experiencing different pains, but everyone has some pains with it nonetheless.
Absolutely, absolutely. So now listen, we had a couple of people say, what if we're not good at anything? Well, here's the thing. This is a real trick, and you don't have to be great at everything. You don't even have to have best practice at everything. I think if you completely ignore having a competency model or having some sort of definition of what good leadership looks like, you want to shore that up. If you have absolutely no sense of who you're going to identify and have never even had a conversation about it, you'll have to start somewhere. So if you are just absolutely starting from ground zero, I think this is a template to start thinking about what conversations should we have first. So don't think about tools or technology or implementing some really elaborate sort of infrastructure. Think first about just having a good conversation about each of these imperatives, and then move into more infrastructure and sort of take a stepwise way of thinking about it, but recognize that these things do sort of interplay with one another. And also we have this big omission with sustain, which we're going to come back to. But you can pick where you want to be successful, and you can enter through any door, which is a really important point about this whole process, that we've seen people and many organizations and incarnations of acceleration systems attempt to boil the ocean, so to speak, and try to make sure that every box is checked before ever trying to choose an area that their organization is particularly passionate about or particularly in need of, and use that as a way to generate energy. Because if you think of the way you learn and the way you personally get energy when you're growing quickly, you can really translate that to the way your organization will respond when you give it a big challenge with respect to acceleration. That's why we like to think of these as not step-by-step, but instead places where you can go to if you will, press a button. These do sort of look like buttons that you might press. So I think this is a good time, Becky, to just pause for a moment and let our audience ask questions or reflect on what we might be referring to, or perhaps go a little bit deeper into one topic or another.
Okay, Matt, can you hear me?
I sure can.
Okay, I'm back. So we welcome your questions in the question panel now. I'll come back on camera so I can see you again. So as you've been listening to Matt and listening to these imperatives around leadership acceleration, what questions are coming to mind for you? And Matt, one of the things I was thinking about is a comment you made earlier about, how it doesn't really help to try to shove more learning into people's already busy and packed schedules. Can you talk to us a little bit more about what you're hearing from organizations related to that, or any kind of workarounds?
Yeah, I sure can. So I think traditionally, when you look at some of the world's most well-known, quote-unquote, development infrastructures, and many years ago, some of you might be familiar with things like corporate universities. They still exist, and corporate universities can be a wonderful thing, but they were very much the construction of a lot of learning infrastructure, I'm going to call it, places where people could go to learn key topics, and they're very much separate from work. And one of the things that we've been talking about at DDI is something that we call the learning and performance gap. And performance being what you do day to day on the job, learning being something you go off to the side to learn, and hopefully that equips you to do your job better. Learning and performance are coming together, and more, because of the way the world operates, they're essentially having to be the same thing. Learning has to happen while I'm working on the job, which means that it's okay if we put together formal learning content, and sometimes the classroom is absolutely essential, but only when it's coupled with some creative thinking about how people can take what they learn in a formal setting. Could be a classroom, could be a web-enabled learning event, could be some coaching with a mentor, could be some self-study, could be heading off to some sort of university setting. There's of course all the incarnations of the way people learn are I think what many of us know them to be. The real new part of that is embedding it into the way people perform on their jobs and equipping them with tools and what we call learning accelerators to help them take what they've learned and immediately, not even quickly, but immediately in the moment, be applying it to what they do on the job. So that's what I mean by not just cramming more learning in, because then it becomes a competition of time. You have to try and find time to make more learning happen. So I do see that there are some questions coming in. Becky, you want to?
I'm happy to share those with you, Matt.
Okay.
So I like this question. It's very interesting. It came from Susan. She's wondering, do you find that some organizations do active succession planning, but it's not in an accelerated plan? And is there a difference in those two things?
That's a great question. The answer is yes, absolutely. As a matter of fact, I'll differentiate between two kinds of succession, one that I'll call replacement planning and the other one that I'll call acceleration. And we are very much believers that any good succession system has to have both. So replacement planning is what you want to do when you've got a key position, CEO being the best example, but not the only one. Sometimes you have key positions that you might have as perhaps general managers or even technology leaders or people who are unique value creators in your culture. And for those jobs, those positions, it's essential, and for those of you who are in publicly held organizations, your shareholders often demand that you have replacement plans in place so that if someone, I like to say, wins the lottery or for some reason decides to retire tomorrow, you have an emergency replacement plan. The problem with that is that a replacement planning approach will soon become insufficient for an organization that's dynamic, that's changing, that's trying to face an evolving context. So that means you have to look deeper into an organization and begin to prepare people more broadly. And it begins to sort of make obsolete any functional siloed development. We hear very often now that organizations are struggling, and we cover this in the book quite deeply. Organizations are struggling with equipping their leaders to prepare to move across boundaries from perhaps one functional silo or one business into another. So part of what Leaders Ready Now is about is how to begin to shape the growth of people earlier in their careers so that they don't just get a natural progression of learning in their own function, but that they begin to learn so that they can move sideways into other parts of the organization. And that enables the acceleration part of succession, not just the replacement part of it. Great question.
Yeah, that's a really good distinction in terms of removing silos and learning across business departments. Very powerful. We have several more questions, Matt. I want to be aware of time. Wow, lots of them. So let me just give you one more, and then I know you have more content. So here's the question. Any scorecard that you use to follow up on leaders developing with this acceleration planning? Is there anything that you've used or seen used as a scorecard?
So this is probably the topic that is getting the most, I would say, renewed attention right now, because I've been part, just myself, of facilitating a number of panels just in recent months. And on these panels are very accomplished HR professionals, often senior executives, CHROs, people who are running HR organizations. And I routinely ask the question, how do you know when your acceleration system is working? And there are two metrics that I get that are most commonly reported as the two metrics, and I'll even put a third in that's very common as well. Three metrics that are most commonly used to evaluate success. One is retention, the second is engagement, and the third is the existence of development plans. Do people have development plans or not? And I will submit to you now that none of those have much to do with acceleration. I'm not saying they're not important. I am saying that they don't have much to do with whether people are increasing their readiness or not. So the kinds of metrics that organizations are beginning to adopt. Remember I said in the commit imperative, in that commit imperative, the dynamic that changes for organizations that are great is that their senior executives start to become competitive about sharing and growing talent. Well, how do you do that? Think about the scoreboard and about any game and about anything you might play or gamify, and how it becomes, how it develops a dynamic that's competitive. And so now let's consider a metric or two. So here's one that one of our clients has adopted, and they call it contribution to the corporate asset pool. And that means that every business leader, and they have about 7 or 8 businesses that report into the CEO, at each annual talent review and in the quarterly reviews leading up to it, each business leader is talking with the CEO and planning to report out on which people from their organization they are offering and actually contributing to the corporate-wide talent pool. And then those people who are shared, if you will, with the rest of the organization are evaluated for how they perform as they move through the rest of the organization. So now I, as a business leader, have just started being evaluated for the kind of people that I put into the organization's available pool of talent for sharing across boundaries. So contribution to corporate asset pool is a big one. Another one that is also very challenging, and very, when I say challenging, I mean it challenges mindset. Not challenging to operationalize. It's called conversions. So many of you may have lists of people who are at some degree of readiness, ready now, ready with development. Some people have time-based readiness, like ready in 2 years, ready in 5 years, ready in 10 years. But we always ask if those are true or not. And so if you say ready in 5 years, is that true? When 5 years passes, is the person actually ready? So, and often they're not. So how do you create a metric that addresses that? And again, I'll call it conversions, which means converting someone from not ready to ready, and actually counting those and declaring who's accountable to facilitate a conversion or more than one conversion. One of the things you'll read about in Grow Your Own Leaders is that we believe it's essential to quantify your leadership readiness gap. How much readiness are we needing to create? And we have a simple calculator that can help you do that. Even if you don't have perfect numbers, it can be an estimate. But if I'm a business leader and I know that I have 7 conversions that I have to deliver in FY17, I now have to work toward achieving 7 conversions, which begins to feel more like an R&D delivery date or a sales growth number or a profit target. And those are very different types of goals and metrics. And I'm sorry for being long-winded on this, but the dashboard concept is such a critical concept in the realm of acceleration, because it completely reframes the nature of your senior management's commitment. So I'm
Sure.
so glad someone asked that question.
And can you translate those abbreviations there? You said FY17, fiscal year 17, and then you said something else, RD?
R&D, research and development. So fiscal year, FY17. I just meant for any given cycle, for next year or for this coming year, I may have 7 people I have to deliver. And that would have come from some analysis that perhaps you would have done, or you would have done collaboratively with a business leader to say, how many positions do you anticipate you won't be able to fill with an internal person? Well, there's our gap. And then I think I was just mentioning R&D, like research and development. Like if you had a product launch and you were trying to get it ready by a certain date, that's a very specific target. A sales target is a very specific target. A profit target, often those have numbers associated with them, or timelines, or very specific things that we can quantify. And what I think things like contribution to corporate asset pool and conversions does is it quantifies the readiness target so that we have something to, I call it gamifying it. It gives our senior executives a way to play ball with each other, and it has a positive spin on it. So it gets to be much more exciting.
I agree with you. I think that otherwise we're left to this subjective feeling like, well, I feel like we're going to have enough leaders, or I think we will.
Right.
And so having those numbers is really critically important. So Matt, I know you have a lot more content to get to. What I want to say about the questions is we might come back to them at the end, or perhaps you could use some of them for inspiration for articles or blog posts in the future.
Absolutely. I don't have a ton more content. There's a few things I did want to share, because a big question that, so I hope we do have some more time for questions. It looks like we have about 15 minutes or so left. But a big question that people will ask us in order to make a case for their own organizations, well, what happens when you do this stuff? And so here's my complicated diagram that says, if you're great at one or more of these, or if you're good at some of these and great at one, or if, like some organizations, we're still struggling to get started with some of these imperatives, but maybe we can be good or great at some of these, what can we expect? And we do see some pretty powerful findings. And I'm just going to share a few examples. And these are examples that are in the book, and there are more. But here's a regional bank that in 6 months' time, they make a big change in the demonstration of some absolutely essential behaviors that they weren't seeing, which is a real operative concept here. Crucial behaviors associating with things like coaching and influencing, leading change, and they just saw tremendous value and culture change in a very short period of time. There's an energy corporation that we worked with. In 4 months' time, they also see a huge increase in some essential behaviors that was part of a real big shift they were making in how they were running their business and which markets they were focused on. And here's a defense contractor that focused up, and in less than 2 years, they get a reversal, if you will. So if you think of the proportion of leaders that you hire from the outside versus the proportion that you promote from within, some organizations have a target that they're going for, and most will at least say they want to promote more from within than they hire from the outside. And some will go as high as a desire for 80% internal promotions, 20% external hires. This is an organization that was operating at about 70% external hires, 30% internal promotions, and in 2 years' time, they reversed that. And they reversed that with evidence that they were getting better performance from the people who they did promote. I might also add that their diversity statistics improved significantly as a part of this process. So, the days are gone when we in human resources and talent management should feel as though we have a hard time defending the value of these efforts. If I sound like I'm a slight bit defensive about this, maybe I am a little bit as I self-reflect, because a lot of times we have business leaders who will say, listen, in so many words, I have more important things to do than what you're suggesting I spend time doing in talent management. And there's a number of slides that I won't have time to go through after this that talk about the evidence that we have. And Becky, I don't really know how to do this in this interface, but there's about 4 slides that follow this. That, well, I'll just click past them if I'm not going to talk about it. But the amount of evidence that we have has begun to be so compelling and so based on big data, not just isolated examples like these 3 you saw, but we have tremendous amounts of data that suggests that this stuff works. Here's an independent study done by the Aberdeen Group. This was done back in 2009. They'd replicated it again in 2011, and the patterns continue. And it shows that some organizations, the ones that adopt a handful of basic practices, and the kind that I'm talking about here, they get better benches is the bottom line. And you don't need me to go through all of these variables. You can take a look at them when you get the slide deck. This was a really busy slide, but look at where the little lightning bolts pop up here. And this is evidence that with a handful of basic practices, you get some really big results in decision making using feedback, yes, engagement and retention, which we said are important, but also better development action and better business performance. This is a meta study based on 161 studies showing that these practices produce massive increases in leadership effectiveness and a series of other variables. And I'm going through these so quickly that, and it's because I don't want to spend time analyzing numbers. You will get these slides. But again, look where the lightning bolts pop up here. When organizations use these processes to get the right people in their senior level leadership positions, they get more revenue and they get more profit and they get faster growth on both of the above. And so that is really the end of the content part that I wanted to share. It's really, I hope, leaving you, it certainly leaves me this way, feeling that I just have a little bit less willingness to accept it when a business leader says to me, I don't have time to focus on acceleration, or in our business, acceleration isn't an essential function. I think a lot of times organizations say they commit to acceleration when what they do is they commit to learning activities, which is great, but that's very different than committing to growth, which is applying what you learn and demonstrating things like conversions and contributions to corporate asset pools. So the idea is not to expect to be perfect at everything. It's to start a chain reaction. Find a place where your organization can generate some energy, something that builds just a little bit more energy than it takes to administer it. A theme that I think that I would want to leave everyone with is that there's a trap in this whole process, and it's that when you start getting into it, because there are so many tools and these days so much technology that's available to do what we do, it will cause us to feel as though we have to implement all these tools and technology. And I believe that much of it is important and it's essential, and process is key. But the moment that process begins to take more energy than it gives, we're in a losing battle. And I think what we're proposing and what Leaders Ready Now is meant to help us all do and think about is starting a chain reaction that produces more energy than it uses up. And so that's, Becky, I think a good spot to see if we might have a couple more questions and try to bring it home from there.
Sure. So I wanted to get back to this one. Paul is asking, what do you see social learning, what role do you see social learning play in developing leaders?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's essential. So social is, I don't want to oversimplify it because it's so omnipresent in everything that we do these days, and it's so much of a part of the way we build communities around the world. I saw a stat the other day showing that Twitter, the participation in Twitter and in Facebook is equivalent or greater than the largest countries in the world in a lot of cases. So communities online are real, and social connections are an essential part of how people connect with one another and learn. And so I think the ways that we're seeing that build are growing and I'm being broad about acknowledging that the importance of the question. We have a series of things that we do to build communities of people who learn and share post-learning events or people who might be part of a learning cadre. One of the things that we spend a chapter on in the book is helping with people who have common learning needs go on learning journeys together so that they can discover and learn and grow and experience new parts of leadership together and share not only with one another who perhaps might have opportunities to grow in these areas, but also with people who are expert and who can bring their own knowledge and wisdom to the table. So populating social networks with people who are both in learning mode and in expert mode, and not just sort of tolerating those. And when I say tolerating, I mean that it used to be that when people showed up in a learning program, we would say, turn your phone off or turn your device off. And now it's just the opposite. We say, as soon as they get in, turn your phone on, sign up to this network, follow this hashtag, join this conversation. So we have really sort of reversed our own mindset around not just the role of technology and networks and social connections, but their pivotal and essential role in how we enable what happens after people acquire new knowledge or learning.
Sure. I think what that does is it really highlights the experience of learning and carries on that experience of learning when you're partnering with someone else.
Yeah, exactly.
I love that. And obviously we remember I don't know if this is a learning style difference, Matt, but I know I remember those things that I have the most emotion around, when I'm experiencing it and learning from it.
Me too.
For sure.
Yeah. When my kids come home from school confused, one of the things we're often apt to talk about is that confusion is just about to give way to something new, which is going to be some learning, and it's going to feel way different as soon as you get through the confusing part. And so, I'm often saying that, having to remind myself that I have to do it too.
Well, what is it? So we talked about excitement, and we also talked about exhilaration, but before that is the fear and anxiety, and then when you push through it, you get to those positive energy feelings.
Exactly.
So I have a comment and a question from Kevin, and he says, at the core, developing leaders requires intentionality at empowering people to make decisions and follow through on implementation. He'd like you to comment on that.
At the core, learning is about intentional. Say it one more time.
Yeah, developing leaders requires intentionality in empowering people to make decisions and then follow through on implementation. So I think maybe highlighting the fact that we have to bring people to choice and then help them follow through on those choices.
We have to bring people to choice. And I'm going to guess, Kevin, that part of what's in the midst of that isn't only what we might ask an individual learner to do, or someone who's a growing leader who might have a lot of possibility in their career. It's one thing to ask them to learn and learn faster, and that requires everything that you're saying, but it's another thing for the organization to say, we're going to adopt that risk, and we're going to systematically begin to take on that risk. That is something that we have confronted head on in our book, because we believe that a lot of organizations haven't fully addressed what it means to take on that level of risk. And I'll give you a perfect example. It's what we refer to as what's often an unhealthy relationship with failure. So a lot of organizations, and there are probably people who are in this call today who can cite examples of people who were a meteoric ascent through an organization. They were rising superstars until they got stretched into an assignment where they didn't do well. And suddenly, like the snap of a finger, someone who is a superstar is almost relegated to complete obscurity. They're just gone, their career plateaus, and the investment in that person comes to an abrupt and unceremonious halt. And that is what I would characterize an unhealthy relationship with failure, because what we believe needs to happen is that, first of all, we have to acknowledge that it's impossible to accelerate growth in the absence of frequent failure. Now, a lot of organizations will say, well, that's what we can't afford. But that means they're assuming that people have to fail at the job level And you don't have to fail at the job level in order for learning to be valuable. What you can fail at is something much smaller, an assignment, a task force, participation in something where there is a little bit of risk. There has to be some risk. And occasionally we do have to put people into jobs that they're not ready for. That will happen. But the expectation that I believe we need to begin to cultivate is that some risk has to be cultivated by the organization. And the only way a senior management team will learn to take on more risk is if they together discuss what parts of the business need attention that aren't currently getting enough attention. And that's space where you can ask people who are learning in your organization to make a contribution. So you can create assignments to help fix a broken process or an obsolete technology or to research a part of a market or a geography or a culture that your organization isn't familiar with. So there's been a history of using action learning teams to get after that, and some of them have been very successful. Some of them have not, and it's often been the design of risk, in my opinion. And so that's a very insightful question that you've asked, Kevin, because the intentionality of taking risks, those are my words. I hope I'm translating your question in the right way, but actually following that through to implementation, as you've said, is really a crucial part of what both individuals and management need to adopt. And it means thinking not only in terms of moving people from job to job, but moving them from assignment to assignment so that the risks aren't so dangerous.
And that seems to go back to what you were saying earlier about acceleration being fueled by people working across business units to have learning across the organization.
Absolutely. As those are some of the best sort of small-scale risks where people can get assignments and get learning that takes place elsewhere besides their core sort of homeroom or home function.
Sure. Well, so one thing that occurs to me in all of this, Matt, is that you talk very much from the perspective of the organization and what the organization needs to do to prepare leaders to be ready and to accelerate their growth. How much of the responsibility for being ready do you think falls upon the individual in terms of taking ownership of their own development?
Yeah, that's such a great question, and I have kind of a two-sided response to it, and I'm going to start with the one that surprises a lot of people. But there's a lot of organizations we've heard say to their employee populations, you have to own your own development. And of course that's not wrong. People do have to own their own development and they have to take charge of their own careers. But now think of what we've been talking about with acceleration. We have people who are not ready and we're trying to get them ready. And often what we're trying to get them ready for is something really critical to the business. That, I would submit, is difficult or impossible for someone to do on their own. And so a lot of organizations have, I hate to say it, but they've copped out of real aggressive acceleration programs because they've said, listen, people have to manage their own growth. Well, they can only manage so much. And so this is a real handshake between management and between individual learners to both take responsibility. And I think what management has to begin to think more clearly about is, where are the needs we have? Where do we need people to contribute where it really matters? That's different from saying we need to get people to go through learning programs. That's important. That's probably a key step. But what management needs to spend more time thinking about is, where do we really need people to help us focus? And then if people are taking charge of their own development, guess what? It's going to start to happen. So last week I was with a finance company out on the East Coast, and they've created something that they call a free market for projects. They are letting business leaders and management populate a web page on their intranet with a number of projects that anyone can sign up for. And for a few of them, they have a few basic prerequisites, like maybe you need to have worked in production in our company in order to be able to participate in this project, or maybe you have to have a basic knowledge of some finance topic or some other there might be a minor prerequisites, but many people who would be from outside those functional areas can participate on projects as a quote-unquote free market, because management has said, guess what, we've got a bunch of important projects. They don't necessarily have to be staffed with people who are in the functional area, so let's create this marketplace where people can sign up and participate. It's a very exciting development that I think begins to help people socialize into their own growth and provide some opt-in as well as some management responsibility to create the needs, if you will.
That's really helpful. And I think we're just about out of time, Matt, so I
Sure
definitely
are.
want to let people know how they can learn more about the book and about DDI and about the ways that you can help. But just think about how powerful it is when someone makes an investment in you to believe in you. And so to be on the other side of working in an organization that chooses to accelerate the growth of their leaders,
That's right.
that would be life-changing for any person, I think.
I think so. And so those are chain reactions that we hope we're all going to start, because we think the reason that the leadership readiness curve is trending in such a different direction than the leadership difficulty curve is because of that kind of investment. And I think a lot of organizations intend to do it the right ways, and they even invest in it with the right heartfelt intentions. But this concept of acceleration has some specific nuances to it that, if you really break it apart, it requires some starting points. And the key is not to have everything right. The key, again, is to start a chain reaction. And what you see here is how you can start a chain reaction with us and with your colleagues and peers in your organization and others. So check out our book, and we have a website that has more content than is in the book. It's called leadersreadynow.com. Follow us on Twitter, that hashtag LeadersReadyNow. Friend me on Twitter or in LinkedIn, and ask us how we can help you rethink it. But more than anything, thank you for your time today. We're so thrilled.
And so for those of you who are still on the line, if you want to send some feedback about this session to me, Becky, at weavinginfluence.com, I'm going to give away 5 of these books, and we really welcome your feedback about what you got out of this event today. And Matt, this has been so fun. Thank you for the opportunity to celebrate the launch of the book and to bring this information to organizations. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you, Becky. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.